The morning sun glinted through the gauzy curtains of the Harrison home as the peaceful rhythm of another weekend began. Their modest red brick house sat at the end of Rosewood Lane, a cul-de-sac that curled like a question mark in a uptight HOA neighborhood where lawns were clipped to military precision and garbage cans had curfews. Inside the home, quiet murmurs of the television echoed alongside the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Mr. Harrison shifted slightly in his recliner, the mechanical whir of the motor assisting his movement. The movement was subtle but necessary. His right leg, replaced with a prosthetic, throbbed occasionally when the weather changed. He was in his mid-40s, a strong and rugged man with silver at his temples, scars that told stories he didn't often share, and eyes that had seen the worst of war and the best of family. Across from him sat Sarah, his wife of 18 years. Her auburn hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her eyes carried the calm intensity of someone trained to remain steady under the worst circumstances. As a seasoned 911 dispatcher, Sarah had heard it all, from heart attacks to home invasions, suicides to standoffs. Her voice, when on duty, was a lifeline. But here, at home, it was tender and warm, especially with Harrison. He smiled gently as she handed him his cup of coffee. "You know," he said, taking a sip, "you make a better brew than any mess hall ever could," she smirked. "That's because I don't serve it with powdered eggs and sand in my boots." Their house was modest, a single story with a garage and a fenced backyard where Sarah had tried, and failed, to grow tomatoes. Their dog, Molly, an aging golden retriever, lay by the back door, her tail thumping softly as the morning lazily passed. Life was slow but good. Harrison's disability had changed many things, but not the love they had built over the years. They were a team, his strength and her voice, a pair that had endured deployments, surgeries, miscarriages, and bureaucracy. The quiet they had now was earned, and it was sacred. But peace has a way of drawing the attention of those who thrive on disruption. Brenda McLachlan was the kind of woman who believed rules were not just guidelines, but moral imperatives. She was tall, severe, and always dressed in starched pastels that reflected her unforgiving nature. With a clipboard in one hand and a Bluetooth headset in the other, she made it her mission to patrol Rosewood Estates like a general inspecting troops. For Brenda, the HOA was not a volunteer position. It was a calling. She had memorized the bylaws of Rosewood Estates and quoted them with the fervor of scripture. A patch of dandelions? That was grounds violation 3.1. Trash can out past 9:20 a.m. Offense 2.4. Unapproved flower pots? Section 5.6, paragraph B. She wielded citations like weapons and warnings like ultimatums. But more than her obsession with rules was her fixation on control. Brenda seemed to hone in on residents she perceived as threats to the standard. This often meant the elderly, the immigrants, the blue-collar families who worked odd hours and couldn't always mow the lawn every Friday morning. And Harrison? He represented a special kind of irritation to Brenda. He didn't bend to her authority. He didn't smile politely at her passive-aggressive comments about Sarah's car being parked slightly angled in the driveway. He didn't attend the HOA meetings that she hosted in her manicured backyard with cucumber sandwiches and name tags. He was polite, but firm, and that infuriated her. Worse, the neighbors liked the Harrisons. Kids brought them cookies on Halloween. People waved when they drove by. Harrison was known for helping a neighbor with a flat tire even though he walked with a cane, and Sarah was a source of calm reassurance for everyone, especially during last year's ice storm when she stayed on the dispatch line for 18 straight hours. Brenda didn't like the attention they got, and so the citations began. One Tuesday morning, while Sarah was still on night shift and Harrison was organizing his garage, an envelope was stuffed through the front door. No postage, no return address, just a manila envelope marked ATTN Compliance. Inside, was a folded letter on HOA letterhead, unsigned, with one line in bold. Your flagpole violates the aesthetics and structural uniformity code of Rosewood Estates. Beneath it, a photo was taped, grainy and zoomed in, of Harrison's flagpole. It wasn't just any pole. It was a welded, custom-built fixture he had carried home from Iraq. The flag that flew atop it had been folded by the hands of his comrades after a convoy attack. It was dented, weather-worn, but sacred. Harrison stared at the paper, the blood draining from his face. He walked outside in silence, his cane clicking against the driveway. The pole stood tall, its base rooted in stone, its flag gently fluttering in the wind. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. He knew it was Brenda. No one else in the neighborhood had the time or the pettiness to care. And she had always found subtle ways to pick fights under the radar. Anonymous complaints were her signature style, the HOA equivalent of guerrilla warfare. Sarah came home around 9 a.m. and found Harrison sitting on the porch, the letter beside him. She read it, then sat beside him without speaking. Her hand found his. "I'll call the HOA board. This isn't right." "No," he said quietly. "She wants a fight. Let's not give it to her yet." Sarah nodded. She knew her husband. He didn't avoid confrontation, but he picked his battles like a soldier, tactically and with restraint. Still, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day, Sarah took time between shifts to call the HOA office, housed in a rented suite in the strip mall by the post office. She was transferred 3 times before someone named Karen, the administrative coordinator, answered. "Yes, hello. I'm trying to find out who sent this violation notice to my husband. We received it yesterday morning. No signature. It's regarding a flagpole." Karen paused. "I don't see any violation issued under your name. Do you have the reference number?" "There is no reference number. It wasn't even mailed. It was hand-delivered." A silence. Then typing. "I don't see anything in our system. Let me check with the board president and call you back." 20 minutes later, Karen returned the call. Her voice was hesitant. "I just spoke to Mrs. McLachlan. She says she has no recollection of sending such a notice and insists no board member was authorized to distribute anything without a vote." Sarah was stunned. "So you're telling me this just appeared out of nowhere?" "I'm not saying that, ma'am. Just that we have no record of it." Sarah's voice turned cold. "Well, someone took a picture of our front yard and used your letterhead. You may want to start with the person who lives 2 doors down and walks around with a clipboard and a superiority complex." Karen offered a nervous laugh. I'll mention that. Thank you for calling." Sarah hung up, more determined than ever. She knew Brenda was hiding behind bureaucracy, and the fact that the board was stonewalling her, pretending nothing happened, meant that Brenda was pulling strings behind closed doors. Sarah wasn't one to be bullied. She may not have worn a badge or carried a gun, but she had the voice that stopped chaos in its tracks. She had calmed down people who had just lost everything in a fire, people holding guns, people trapped in floods. Brenda didn't intimidate her. If anything, she irritated her like a mosquito buzzing near a burn scar. But Harrison? Harrison was a man of pride, and this violation struck deeper than a flag. It was about dignity, legacy, and the feeling that the very country he fought for now questioned his place in his own yard. Later that week, while Harrison was trimming the bushes near his front walk, their next-door neighbor, Tom, an older man who used to be a police sergeant, walked over with his hands in his pockets. "Hey," Tom said, voice low. "You got a minute?" Harrison nodded. "Yeah, what's up?" Tom glanced around. "Keep this between us. I was at the last board meeting, wasn't public. Brenda called it an executive strategy session. She's been pushing something called Operation Uniform Aesthetic." "Her words, not mine." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a fascist design brochure." "She's been pushing the board to approve monthly compliance sweeps." unofficial walks through the neighborhood where she takes pictures, logs infractions, and encourages corrections. Encourages? Tom nodded grimly. Targets is more like it. She's got a list, and you're on it. So am I. So is the Smith family. He's a retired firefighter. Anyone who doesn't fit her brand, basically. She told the board that veterans and older residents often feel entitled and resist improvement. Her exact words. Harrison's jaw clenched. Did anyone stand up to her? A couple of us tried. She shot us down with bylaws and claimed anyone objecting was emotionally compromised. She's good at playing both dictator and victim. Thanks for telling me. Tom nodded and glanced over his shoulder again. Just be careful. She plays dirty. And if she's threatened, she won't stop until she gets what she wants. As Tom walked back to his house, Harrison stood still, his hand resting on the cane that had replaced a leg lost in another land. He stared up at the flag waving quietly in the wind, and something in his heart hardened. Not from bitterness, but from resolve. This wasn't just about a flagpole anymore. It was about fighting for home. It happened on a Thursday morning just after 10:00 a.m. Sarah was finishing a 12-hour night shift at the 911 center, and Harrison had gone to the VA clinic in town for a routine checkup. The house was quiet, locked up, the blinds down. Molly, their golden retriever, lay snoozing in the living room, ears twitching at every creak. At exactly 10:11 a.m., a figure entered the backyard through the side gate, gently but with practiced familiarity, as though the latch had been opened many times before. She was dressed in her usual attire, pastel blue blouse, khakis, sensible white shoes. Her gray hair was swept back tightly, and her left hand held a small spiral notebook while her right hand gripped a phone. It was Brenda. She didn't knock, didn't ring the bell, didn't leave a note on the door. She walked straight into the Harrisons' backyard. What she didn't realize was that the neighbor 2 doors down, an ex-IT technician named Jody, had just installed a wide-angle security camera on her back porch, and the lens caught everything. Brenda marched across the yard like she was inspecting a crime scene. She examined the shed, knelt beside the raised flower beds, and even opened the barbecue grill. Then she took a few photographs of what appeared to be a slightly weathered patio chair. Her lips moved silently as she muttered into her phone. At 10:19, she exited the same way she came, quietly, without leaving a trace. But Jody had seen the footage that afternoon while reviewing motion alerts. She walked over to Sarah that evening, holding her tablet with the footage already queued up. "You're going to want to see this," Jody said flatly. Sarah watched in stunned silence as Brenda prowled through their private property like a thief casing the place. Sarah's hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury. "She crossed a line," she whispered. "She really did it this time." Harrison stood behind her, his jaw set. He'd seen insurgents behave with more respect. They immediately downloaded the footage and made 3 copies. One for their records, one for their lawyer, and one for the HOA board. That Saturday, the Harrisons attended the monthly HOA meeting for the first time in nearly a year. It was held at the community center's banquet room. White folding chairs in neat rows, tables lined with copies of meeting minutes, and stale coffee in paper cups. Brenda stood at the front in her usual place beside the projector screen, looking as smug and polished as ever. The room quieted as Sarah took the microphone. She was dressed plainly. Jeans, gray sweater, no makeup. But her voice? Steady. Clear. The same voice that talked suicidal teenagers off bridges and guided choking fathers through Heimlich instructions. She didn't need volume to command attention. She simply spoke. "I want to thank the board for allowing community commentary today. My name is Sarah Harrison. I've lived here with my husband, a retired Army veteran, for 9 years. And I'd like to show you all something that happened this week while we were not home." She plugged in a USB drive. The video footage appeared on the screen behind her. Gasps filled the room as Brenda's figure emerged in HD, casually strolling through the Harrisons' backyard, opening things, photographing items, scribbling notes like a home inspector who had broken in. Ms. McLachlan entered our property. Without notice, without permission, and without cause, Sarah said, eyes never leaving Brenda. And as far as I know, she's not employed by any code enforcement agency. Brenda's face blanched. This is an ambush. It's called evidence, Sarah interrupted calmly. You trespassed on private property. This video has been forwarded to our attorney and to the local police. I'm speaking today because you didn't just violate our trust. You violated the safety of this entire neighborhood. If you're doing this to us, who else have you targeted? Murmurs spread among the crowd like wildfire. Several neighbors looked nervously at one another. One man near the back muttered, "I saw her in my backyard last fall." "I just thought I imagined it," a woman said. Brenda raised her voice. "I was conducting a courtesy inspection for neighborhood harmony. If your yard wasn't in violation—" "You're not authorized," Sarah said coldly. "And you're not above the law." The room went silent. For the first time, Brenda looked shaken. By Monday morning, the ripple effects of Sarah's public exposure had turned into a tidal wave. The HOA's inbox was flooded with emails. Dozens of residents expressed concern, outrage, and disbelief. A few defended Brenda, saying her strictness kept the property values high, but the vast majority called for accountability. The board, once comfortably compliant with Brenda's leadership, was now in crisis mode. On Wednesday, a special emergency meeting was announced. It would be closed to the general public but would allow recorded testimony from concerned residents. That night, Harrison recorded a short, blunt video from his garage. He sat beneath the old American flag that had caused so much controversy. His prosthetic leg rested on a support stool as Molly lay at his feet. "I served this country so people could live free, not to be intimidated by petty tyrants with clipboards," he said. "My wife and I never asked for trouble. We mind our business, follow the rules, and pay our dues. But if someone thinks they can walk into our home, judge our lives, and manipulate the system without consequence, then they're about to learn that veterans don't run. We stand." The video was played at the board's meeting. By the end of the session, 4 out of 6 board members had called for an official vote to remove Brenda as president. The date was set. 2 weeks, a recall election, and the community was paying attention. 2 days after the recall meeting was announced, the citations began. First came a letter about their patio umbrella. Too large, apparently. Then it was a notice about their wind chimes, causing auditory disturbance, according to a complaint. Next, a warning about their shed needing paint touch-up to meet visual cohesion standards. Each notice came in an envelope, dated and stamped within 24 hours of each other. And none had signatures, only the cold, sanitized stamp. "From the Office of Community Compliance." Sarah laughed bitterly as she read them. "She's spiraling. She's using every rule as a weapon now," Harrison muttered. "She knows she's losing." That evening, their neighbor Jody came by again with a flash drive. "Caught Brenda on camera again, taking photos of your yard from behind my fence." Harrison looked at the footage. There she was, zoom lens out, lips pursed, wearing sunglasses, and what looked like army surplus boots. "She's stalking us now," Sarah said, alarmed. "We're not playing defense anymore," Harrison replied. They compiled the citations into a folder labeled Retaliation Evidence and sent a formal complaint to the board, attaching timestamps, video footage, and duplicate copies of every new notice. The response from the board was swift. Brenda was barred from issuing further citations until the recall vote. Brenda didn't respond, but her silence was louder than any warning letter. It was a long shot, but Sarah was running out of patience. She scrolled through her old contacts and found a name. Emma Klein, a freelance journalist who had once dialed 911 when her father had a heart attack. Sarah had stayed on the line with her for 7 minutes, walking her through CPR until paramedics arrived. They had exchanged emails afterward. Emma had even sent her flowers. Sarah typed, "Hi Emma, this is Sarah Harrison. 911 dispatcher, you helped save your dad a couple years ago. I have a story I think your readers might care about. It's local, it's real, and it's about power abuse in a neighborhood that's supposed to be safe." Emma responded an hour later. "I remember you, Sarah. You saved my dad. Send me everything you've got." That night, Sarah compiled every document, video, and photo. She wrote a timeline. Emma reviewed it all, then set up a phone interview. Within 3 days, the article hit the front page of the town's online paper: flagpoles, citations, and trespassing. How one HOA president went too far. It spread like wildfire through local Facebook groups, neighborhood watch threads, and even the city council's internal emails. Harrison stood in the kitchen reading it aloud while Sarah smiled. "Brenda's name is trending," he chuckled, but what meant more to Sarah was the final paragraph Emma wrote. "I don't know much about HOA politics, but I do know heroes when I see them. And the people who listen, guide, and protect without expecting praise, those are the neighbors we should fight for, not fear." The tide had turned, and the recall vote was only 5 days away. Saturday arrived with a quiet intensity, like the early hours before a thunderstorm. The community center parking lot was full before 10 a.m. Cars lined the curb, some neighbors walking blocks just to cast their vote. A recall had never happened in the neighborhood's 20-year history. Until today. Sarah sat on the front porch, sipping coffee, her eyes scanning the sidewalk as clusters of residents walked by. Harrison stood near the flagpole, freshly oiled, now proudly flying a new American flag he'd raised just after sunrise. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. People waved as they passed. A few nodded solemnly. Others gave a thumbs up. They weren't allowed to campaign on voting day, but they didn't have to. The story had already spread. The video footage, the retaliation letters, the article by Emma Klein. Everyone had seen it, read it, talked about it. Even the few who had once defended Brenda now kept their heads down. Inside the community center, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Brenda stood off to the side, arms folded, wearing a stiff blazer and sunglasses, despite the fact that the room was lit with overhead fluorescents. She said nothing as people walked past her to drop their votes into the box. Some board members avoided her entirely. Others gave her curt nods. No one embraced her. No one spoke in defense. By noon, over 80% of the eligible households had voted, an unprecedented turnout. At 3 p.m., the doors closed. The results would be announced by sundown. At 5:42 p.m., the official tally was posted. Out of 134 eligible votes, 117 were cast in favor of removal. Only 12 supported Brenda. 5 abstained. It wasn't just a defeat. It was a landslide. A hush fell over the crowd as the announcement was made. Then, slowly, polite clapping began, building into applause. Some cheered, others hugged. Brenda stood frozen at the edge of the room, her arms trembling, her jaw clenched, her face flushed red. "This is a setup," she muttered. "You're all sheep. You've been manipulated." No one responded. "I will sue," she snapped. "I'll take this entire board down. You'll see. I have connections. I will take this to court." Her voice rose until it cracked, a sharp, desperate edge to her tone. But by then, no one was listening. The board had already turned away. The vote was signed. Her position was terminated effective immediately. Brenda grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, nearly knocking over a chair on the way out. Outside, Sarah and Harrison watched from their porch as her silver Lexus sped past the house, tires screeching slightly at the corner. Sarah exhaled. "It's over." Harrison placed a hand on her shoulder. "No, it's just beginning." On Monday evening, a special meeting was held, this time not out of crisis, but out of accountability. The newly appointed interim president, a retired school principal named Linda Carter, stood before a room of neighbors with a handwritten statement. We, the Glenwood Meadow HOA Board, formally apologize to the Harrison family for the unauthorized invasion of privacy, retaliatory violations, and emotional stress endured under the previous administration. Your courage in confronting this abuse helped restore integrity to this community. The room erupted in applause. Sarah stood beside Harrison, holding his hand. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded in quiet acceptance. Jody, the neighbor who had first shared the camera footage, was appointed to the board's new ethics committee. One by one, residents came up to thank the Harrisons. People they barely knew, couples with children, retired veterans, widows, new homeowners, even a teenage boy who said his dad had almost been fined over a skateboard ramp Brenda didn't approve of. The board also agreed to review all citations issued over the last year, especially those filed within the final 30 days of Brenda's term. This isn't just a reset, Linda said. It's a reckoning. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at the Harrisons' home. It was from Brenda's attorney, claiming wrongful termination, reputational damage, and harassment. She named the HOA, the board, the Harrisons, and even Jody as co-defendants. The suit asked for $250,000 in damages. Sarah didn't panic. She'd seen this coming. Their attorney, a sharp but humble man named Roy Delgado, reviewed the complaint and laughed softly. This isn't even a case. It's a tantrum written on letterhead. He filed a motion to dismiss, citing the HOA's bylaws, the recorded evidence of trespassing, retaliatory notices, and Brenda's documented overreach. The court agreed. In a hearing that lasted less than 30 minutes, the judge dismissed the case with prejudice. Brenda, who had refused to show up in person, filed a tearful video statement on a community forum. But by then, nobody cared. The neighborhood had moved. Her Lexus was no longer seen in the area. Rumors said she'd sold her home and moved to another HOA across town. God help them, Harrison muttered. Summer came early that year. The jasmine bloomed heavy around the porch. Kids rode bikes again. Dogs barked playfully. Neighbors waved at each other without suspicion. The flag outside the Harrisons' home stood tall and proud, catching the breeze with a soft flapping rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. No more violation notices. No more photos. No more eyes peeking over fences. One Saturday, the HOA held a barbecue for the entire community in the park. Harrison and Sarah were asked to attend as guests of honor. They tried to decline, said they didn't do anything special, but the board insisted. At the event, Linda Carter gave a short speech. There are people who follow rules and people who enforce them. But the Harrisons showed us what it means to defend community. Not through power, but through truth. They reminded us that neighborliness begins with respect. People applauded, but the Harrisons stayed humble. Afterward, as dusk settled and the lights strung between trees began to glow, a group of kids asked Harrison what it was like being a soldier. He sat down on a bench, his leg resting on a crate, and smiled. Sometimes being a soldier means you stand between trouble and people who can't fight back. Sometimes it means protecting something simple, like a home or a flag. Sarah joined him, leaning against his shoulder. They didn't win medals, no parades, no headlines. But in Glenwood Meadows, everyone knew who had brought peace back to their block. And it all started with a flagpole.